Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. Apologies real quick for the audio quality in this introduction. I swear that it's much, much better in the episode. I'm actually recording this on the road in Costa Rica for our team offsite, and I don't have my microphone. So anyway, this is a part of our Kitchen Side series where we pull back the curtain and we show you the behind-the-scenes conversations, debates, strategies, and brainstorming sessions that we have at our agency. So this episode was really fun. We had AI, specifically Perplexity, interview us. So basically, I crafted a couple prompts live through Perplexity, asking it to research Omniscient Digital, what we do, what we're known for, including our founders, and then had it come up with themes that it would want to ask us about it for our podcast host, and then had it ask sample questions, and we answered them. Super fun. So AI interviews Omniscient Digital. Here we go. Without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the Long Game Podcast. When I get busier, I get lazier. And when I get lazier, I get smarter. So I was thinking about a proposal and they're like, hey, we actually don't need the entire content portfolio audit. We just want the bottom funnel, blah, blah. And I was like, I hate the detail orientation of this. Like, how am I going to spec out the number of pages and the cost per hour? And then I was like, what if I just charged half? And then I was like, oh yeah. Because then we're setting ourselves up for a bigger engagement anyway, and we're not going to lose money. So it's kind of a sales. I'm like, I didn't have to overthink that. And then with the podcast, I was like, I don't have any ideas. I'm like, what if AI interviews us? and then I just do a demonstration of AI. I'm like, I can just ask it to analyze our website and our founders and say, what are they known for? What would you ask them if you're, podcast host? And then give us questions for that. That's kind of a cool idea that requires no effort. Let's see if this results in good questions, and maybe they can even let us weave in some of the topics that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So I prompted Perplexity. I didn't use any other tools, just Perplexity. So I said, tell me about Omniscient Digital. What does the business do and what are they known for? Who are the founders and what are they known for? So I just set the table and basically said Omniscient's an organic growth agency that helps B2B software companies leverage SEO and content to drive business growth. Founded by Ali, Alex, and David. Previously held roles at blah, 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 right? So it knows about us.
Wow, it came up with all that?
Yeah, it's a really good research tool. I've actually used it to prep some of my podcasts with better known guests who have public personas.
I've been hearing a lot more people like Perplexity over ChatGPT. It's a common thing I'm hearing now.
It's okay. I think Perplexity is just glorified Google search summaries. Okay. It's no better, no worse. It pulls 4 or 5 citations, and they're usually top 2 pages of Google. It's good for summaries, but it's not magic. So the next question I asked was, okay, so if you were to host a podcast and interview them, the founders, what themes and topics would you want to cover? So they say, all right, founding, story, and vision. So inspiration, motivation, vision, mission, content marketing and SEO strategy, challenges and learnings, industry insights and innovations, leadership and team dynamics, and then personal journeys and advice. So these are relatively broad categories. And then I asked, cool, could you come up with 3 to 5 questions in each category? And the questions should be unconventional and non-standard, leading to potentially provocative and interesting answers that draw the attention of the audience of marketing and growth leaders.
Wow.
Provocative.
Prompt engineering, yo.
That's good.
Gets the people going.
All right. So should we start with maybe the founding story and vision questions?
Let's do it.
In the early days of Omniscient Digital, what was a belief or assumption that you held that you later found out to be completely wrong?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, I think when in the earlier days, when we were how do we get more leads? It was we got to do LinkedIn and be on Twitter and do a podcast and repurpose everything and essentially kind of do a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, I think, big proponents, or at least I'll speak for myself. I was a big proponent for content repurposing across all channels and all that stuff. And I think we just learned that's a waste of time. You don't need to be everywhere.
Yeah.
You just need to be let's say sure, your persona or whoever your audience is, they're probably on TikTok and LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and whatever other platforms there are. But which ones do they spend the most time on? Like there's probably one or two that they're mostly on. Probably focus on those instead of trying to be on YouTube when you're trying to sell to a CMO or something. And so that was a big thing for me. And I don't think it was ever explicitly stated like, oh, I don't believe this anymore. But we just did a workshop with Finn McKenty where I think we did explicitly say, oh yeah, we don't really think that's a good use of time. It kind of becomes like check the box activities that are marginally beneficial if you spend more time on it. So that was a big one in terms of at least how we grow our business.
Because when people think about content repurposing or content diversification, they think about the marginal cost of additional actions, but not the marginal value or utility. So it's easy enough to say, do a webinar, pull the transcript, turn that into a blog post, turn that into a tweet, turn that into a LinkedIn. Each additional action only takes, say, an extra hour or an extra $100 or whatever that value is. But then they don't think, all right, well, what's the marginal value of each of those? And I think that was where we realized that it was very little to zero versus like, I had talked a little bit in the past about this idea of program versus campaign thinking. And like a program compounds on itself. So ideally, if you're running A/B tests, any individual test might not win, but over the course of 10 to 100 experiments, a couple will win big and your learnings should compound. And with what we usually do, which is SEO, the marginal utility of an additional page created is high because like that's hopefully going to build your topical authority. You've got another page that could generate links. You've got another page that you can internal link to. So the cost may be the same to repurpose to 10 or 15 different channels, but actually the applied focus and concentration gives you better results on the value side. That's what I learned. But yeah, we used to believe in the kind of be everywhere. I wrote a blog post called like nose to tail content, all about repurposing. And I think we were probably wrong.
Well, speaking of the blog, I remember trying to apply the same type of programs to our own blog as we would to our clients. Created a lot of top of funnel content, thought we would need to have something on everything that we did, what is or how to. It was not how we sold our services, top of funnel blog content. Now we have, Alex doing field notes, the Kitchen Side podcast. I think anything that allows folks to see inside of our brains, because that's what we're selling, right? Like we're selling our brains and our team's brains and how we think about organic growth. So anything that can give prospects a peek into how we think and how we work, I think has been successful in terms of content marketing. But rolling out a really robust top of funnel strategy did nothing for us. I think that's something that I learned early on.
Another thing too, this is really early on, but when we first started the company, I don't even know if we had established an LLC or maybe we had a website, but the thesis was that we would work with D2C e-commerce websites because they were hot at the time. This was 2018, 2019. And they were heavily reliant on paid acquisition, specifically on Facebook and Instagram. And it was sort of a race to the bottom because customer acquisition costs were getting much higher on those platforms. So we had figured coming from B2B, where content and SEO was well respected and established, we're like, okay, eventually these companies are going to start to think about diversifying their acquisition efforts. And our first client was Peak Tea. So we had one valid data point in that direction. But then through trying to acquire more of them, and I remember going to lunch, going to coffee with some of these companies, it just didn't turn out to be true. They had a different paradigm. And I'm not saying like all D2C companies are the same, but they just didn't have the same level of understanding as to what SEO looks like, what the payback periods were, what the investment costs were. There was just a level of education before there was even demand. And it wasn't like we were one of 5 agencies compared. We were trying to convince them of the value of doing it in the first place. So we work with B2B SaaS now. That was like a really, really early one though.
Which makes a lot more sense considering our backgrounds. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That was before me.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've reflected on recently too is I was in a like peer group of founders conversation and they were like, yeah, what does everyone's marketing program look like? What's working for them? And I think when we first started, I used to think like, oh, it needs to be this well thought out system and everything's connected. You do your retargeting ads, you do your LinkedIn posts, and that gets turned into podcasts, and you have a newsletter and all of that. And it just didn't work like that. We kind of experimented a couple things like here and there, and over time added new things, cut things out. Like if we tried to plan, which in my mind, I did want to make it more planned out because that's how my brain worked. But I've evolved over time. We were like, let's just do the podcast. And then like, oh, let's revive the newsletter. We tried that for a bit. Now let's do LinkedIn. Like we just got consistent with one thing, and then we just started adding new layers to it, where now if I describe our program to people, they're like, oh, that's a lot. But it doesn't feel like a lot.
No.
But it all somehow works together. But I feel like it had to be more organic in how we built the program rather than trying to be super methodical from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it almost feels like we're doing less than ever, or fewer things. Like we're obviously doing more work. It's a lot of effort. Obviously, even before we started this podcast, we were like, what the hell are we going to talk about? Right. It's a lot of like reflection and pausing and collecting, what we've learned throughout the weeks, but it doesn't feel like we're doing as many plays. It's like we're very concentrated and putting like a lot of effort into a few key plays. Whereas before, we were like spray and pray kind of thing.
There's sort of a difference to me between like vision, which some of that has remained the same over time, where we kind of started with the thesis that SEO and content marketing should drive attributable business outcomes and growth goals. And that's kind of underpinned a lot of our communication as well as our services. And then there's a tactical fluidity that I think there's that old Mike Tyson quote. It's like everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And you can certainly over-engineer and get into sort of analysis paralysis, midwit zone, where you're trying to like architect this entire system with absolutely zero market or customer feedback. So you do things, you learn, action produces interesting feedback and information, and then you use that to basically pivot and iterate your way into something that works for you. I think upfront planning, at the high level, at the vision level, makes a lot of sense because it directs your tactics that you would choose or the hypotheses that you would choose. But then you have to be open, to the actual feedback that you're getting from those campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a slippery slope that comes with learning from folks that have come before us. Is you only see the end state and you think that, oh, this person built this whole strategy, or this company or whoever you're learning from via podcast, via book, whatever. And it looks really clean and it looks really tidy. So you try to have your own strategy resemble that out the gate. But something that my coach has said to me about various things is you have to leave room for emergence. I don't know if she said that to you guys in the emerging leaders, literally emerging leaders. But she's reminded me of that a lot as my role has changed, as like our company has changed, different chapters. I think we're moving into a new season soon. And it's going to be messy again until we learn what works, kind of like trial through failure. But yeah, that's kind of the slippery slope I've learned from trying to learn from those who've come before us, as it's usually not that clean when we do it ourselves.
Next question. If you could go back to the day that you founded the company, what's one piece of advice you'd give your past self that contradicts conventional wisdom? Because you kind of just answered that.
My thing for sure is around like fear of failure. I think that's a little bit more inside. It doesn't have anything to do with like executing on strategy or hiring, but definitely wish I could go back and just tell myself to like just deal and keep pushing forward. But yeah, I think we mostly just talked about that.
Hire good people and get out of the way is not great advice for most people. That I think we've learned. It's not about micromanaging. That's like a bad word and has bad connotation. It's like you have to provide like an environment of support as well as constraints and accountability.
Yeah.
That to me is like, people commonly say that, especially in tech and in Silicon Valley. And I don't think that's applied.
I think too, we've been talking funny enough about how I just started Ted Lasso. Alex has seen Ted Lasso. David has yet to. But the 10-second memory thing, I think that will stick with me for a very long time. And I think I could go back and tell myself to have a 10-second memory because like...
Can you explain the concept real quick?
Yeah. So it's like the first or second episode of the first season. And Ted Lasso says like, you want to know what the happiest animal is? And someone's like, what? And he's like, a goldfish, because they have a 10-second memory. I tend to let mistakes weigh on me big time, which then inhibits, just moving forward, just on to the next. And obviously there's something to be said about learning from when you mess up, which I think we do an excellent job at, but it's just letting it just sticks. It's like a rain cloud. And I think I wish I could go back and tell myself, like, have a 10-second memory. Hiring good people, as you just said, Alex, easier said than done. I think we've moved through a couple iterations of our team, learned as we've hired folks and as folks have moved on. I think I wish I could have bounced back quicker from that. And I think I do now. But that's something that I would definitely tell myself from day one is just keep moving.
That's a very Zen attitude. I told you I use that phrase a lot now. And I remember I was playing pickleball a couple of weeks ago with two people I didn't know. They were in the Slack group, and I was on a team with a guy I didn't know, and we like messed up, had a bad point or something like that. And I'm like, be the goldfish. and the guy looked at me like I was a fucking lunatic.
What the fuck?
It's like, what are you talking about?
I have something similar to that, Allie, where I think a lot of the learnings for me, like the marketing and the work are actually pretty straightforward. I think it was the how do I function within, like as a leader of the company, like as a co-founder with you all, as someone who's client facing. And it's kind of weird. Like if I were to give myself this advice when we started the company, I think it would have rung on deaf ears, because I think through doing a company was how I learned, like got better at these things. But I would have just tell myself like, hey, I don't care how many books you read on Zen Buddhism or meditations or Stoicism, you have shit to work through. And like be prepared to do that inner work. Like it's not just going to be about the business models and sales and clients. Like that's table stakes. But if you want to grow this company and be a good co-founder, you're going to have to work through your own baggage. Not that I have like a ton of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But I mean, there was definitely ego I had to work through. There was definitely like maybe some instinctual behaviors that I've had where I'm like, oh, why did I behave that way? And like you both have helped me work through some of those things. And that, I don't know, it's been a fun journey. I feel like I'm a better person, like through building the business in a weird way.
Yeah, I say
it's very, very fluffy.
No, I think that this is the experience that will build me too. Getting married and growing this business around the same time has been hard as hell. But I don't think there's anything more humbling than doing something like this.
I have another one, and I don't think it's conventional wisdom. It kind of depends on the space in which you operate. But marketers seem to have taken this idea to the whole other side of the pendulum, which, there's that phrase like build it and they'll come, the field of dreams thing, which I almost think is a straw man at this point. I don't think anybody probably believes that anymore. But I think marketers have maybe taken this idea of distribution and promotion too far, where we've underemphasized the value of the product or the service. And, it depends in which industry you operate. Like there's certainly like commoditized goods and services that the marketing does differentiate the value. But in our business, the product or the service is extremely important. And in fact, if I had to choose one or the other, given that we've already had a network and we had some client acquisition methods, right? You obviously have to like be in front of people and be visible to get clients. But I would take the service. Like if I had to index fully on one or the other side, extremes, I would take a really, really good service and over-index on that versus being extremely visible on LinkedIn, having a massive audience, being very good at communicating things. Because I've seen the companies that have done that really well, they'll grow very fast. And then you see, all of a sudden they're laying off 60% of the company. And it's like, maybe it's not quite vaporware, but maybe like there should have been more substance and not just, more steak and less sizzle.
Yeah, I'll take the steak.
I think we've done that well. Because I think been the beauty of having 3 partners is we can kind of divide and conquer in that sense. You all are definitely more out there. Obviously, you spend time with Finn, building your LinkedIn programs. I've been a little bit more behind the scenes. I think we've all kind of supported each other. But with an agency, going back to what I said about like marketing ourselves, with the podcast and the field notes and giving people like a peek into who we are, we wouldn't go very far if our referrals and word of mouth sucked. And that's like way more powerful and I think lasts a lot longer than like retargeting LinkedIn ads. because once people get a peek behind the curtain, if there's no substance there, they're not going to work with us, nor will they refer us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and most of the deals do come from like dark social is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. It's like friends talking to other friends, colleagues talking to colleagues, and they're like, "Oh, hey, I'm looking to build up my organic. Oh, hey, we worked with this agency that was awesome," or "Oh, hey, we worked with this agency that sucked." Like, don't work. A lot of those conversations are not attributable. Like they happen at conferences and happy hours and Slack groups and text messages. How do you balance the tension between staying true to your original vision and adapting to new market realities? That's a good one. We've had to adapt a lot the last couple of years now.
Yeah, a big one was, I think earlier on, we had our whole idea was SEO and content should drive like bottom line revenue, not just traffic. But one thing that I think was surprising for me that we've talked about a lot was less emphasis on a content side. It just became super commoditized. And I think AI probably had a contribution to that as well. But more and more people are like, we need SEO help. And you've done a great job with like kind of the customer research on that, Alex, of, hey, people have budget for SEO, not for content. Like they view SEO as the performance channel. They don't view content as a performance channel. And we're really good at SEO, so we should talk about that more. And because of that, even just the way I talk to clients about what we do or prospects about what we do, I'm emphasizing a lot more on SEO, like not just like technical stuff, which a lot of other agencies do, but kind of the whole thinking about it and how we build growth programs rather than talking about how many content pieces do you want. It's been a different conversation for me, which it's not surprising, but yeah, that was interesting to me.
Which both are important in the traditional ad agency paradigm. There's like the media buyer or the account planner, which would be like our version of SEO strategy. They're thinking about distribution, ICP, targeting, et cetera. And then there's creative. And both need to be in place, right? If you have the perfect strategy and the creative doesn't resonate, it doesn't hit specs, right? Then the strategy is useless. But without the strategy, if it's just creative, if you're just like, hey, we just need to get out there and do storytelling, you're like, okay, well, how is that going to reach the intended audience?
Yeah.
Like, what's your plan for that? So you have to have both sides. The learning for me has actually been the original vision is robust. Like that idea that we've had, that thesis is robust. And I think the fluidity comes from how we do it. And the times where we let market realities dictate our original thesis or like sway us in that direction, I think we were wrong. So there was one point where we were doing our own media marketing initiatives and we're like, hey, we should offer this as a service and like do the whole like webinar to pod to YouTube to repurpose pipeline. And we're like, actually, that's not us. That's a very valuable service, but that's not us, right? Like that's not our original thesis. And even like the big AI boon where it was a lot of fear and uncertainty and nobody really knew what they were doing with it. All the questions were like, how are we using this? How are we like reducing the cost of content? And it's like we actually had a pretty solid process in place. And now we're using it in intelligent ways to sort of like, increase efficiency. But like the crux of what we do is actually the original vision is still pretty true.
I remember when we had the conversation about our positioning as an agency, because for a while we were, I don't know if we were necessarily calling ourselves, but folks were calling us content marketing. And I remember we talked about how that was no longer accurate or only accurate. That was just a component of what we did, more on the fulfillment side. And then we talked about the struggles of being called like an SEO agency, because that tends to err on the more technical side. And we knew we were more than that. And so when we landed on organic growth, I was just so excited at how accurately that portrayed what we did. It still captured content, it still captured like SEO primarily, but it kept the scope of what we could do in the future so wide. Anything organic, anything growth marketing focused. And I felt like that was a really good way to position what we were. And even now when folks are like, oh, content marketing, I'm like, we're not just content marketing, that's not necessarily only what we do. And I don't think that it would have helped us grow to where we are now if we had stayed in that lane.
What is
Oh
content
God,
marketing?
Alex, I knew you were going to come with something like that. Is that real or rhetorical? Are you quizzing me? I'm going to call it rhetorical.
You can answer it if you want.
What is quality, Alex?
It's such a catch-all. What's a counterintuitive insight about content or SEO that most people in the industry might disagree with? Hey, I've heard that question before.
Yeah, very familiar.
Very creative AI. Somebody's been reading Peter Thiel.
I think most of it is simple and people overcomplicate. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but in our industry, perhaps in all services companies, the complexity sells. And so people want to make things seem more complex than they actually are to make it look like they're doing a lot of work. And it is a lot of hard work, but a lot of it is pretty straightforward. Like a lot of the clients we even work with, I'm just like, look, you barely have any content on your site. You don't need to worry about these fancy technical optimizations or schema tags or anything like that. Just publish content. Like that is the first place to start. Get content out there. More content equals opportunity to rank. But then even in producing the content, people want to share these crazy frameworks for how to go about building content, which I think are helpful, but it's kind of talking a lot more about how the dish is made rather than what the dish is and how it tastes. Like I think we do a good job of explaining maybe some of the nuances, but also simplifying, communicating the level of detail needed to like a VP who doesn't need to know about all the intricacies or the technical side of things.
Right. Who actually doesn't care and shouldn't care about them.
Doesn't care.
It's the midwit meme again, but it reminds me of this idea of somebody who spends 10 times the amount of time automating a task as it would have taken to just do the task. Where
that's me. I've learned the hard way.
Well, I mean, if you're repeating the task over and over, like you're prorating the cost of it. But like when I see AI stuff now where they're like, yeah, I like trained 5,000, pieces of content that I've written and used LangChain, like multiple AI agents and like did this. It's like a 25-step process to write a LinkedIn post. And I'm like, what if you just wrote the LinkedIn post? It's like 10 minutes. Like it doesn't take any time. Like, what are you doing? It's like very like, or it's like the whole Rome research, second brain, like writers who, they've got these like bi-directional linking second brain knowledge graphs that they store every conversation they've had, every note they've taken, every book they've read, because then theoretically, like when they need an insight, they can just search it easily and like they can use that to write their book or their essay or whatever. And it's like, what if you just wrote the thing? Like just I use Apple Notes. Like just store notes and write it. Like it's not that hard.
Yeah, I can speak to my whole journey of going from like going through the whole midwit meme, like because I used to spend so much time setting up these Notion databases, not even for the business. This was before the business, for myself to like keep track of my credit cards and like when I need to cancel a credit card and all this shit. Sounds insane, and I'm like, I don't need any of this information. I just spent 3 hours building this thing out for no fucking reason. And for business, it was the same thing. My first thing was, how do I automate this with Zapier? And I'd spend hours trying to figure out Zapier and like custom coding some stuff. I'm like, wait, how much time is this actually going to save me? And how much time have I spent on this already? It's like, I'm just going to do the thing. So for all the people who are spending too much time automating, might want to revisit whether that's actually worth it.
Don't overthink it is a big one, right? We've said that to ourselves and to each other quite a bit. We did it with sales too, where we're like, oh, like should we set up like automated notifications for like companies in this criteria bracket where it's like they've raised this amount of money and they're in this industry and they've got this new CMO and, should we like customize and personalize emails and use triggers and this and that. And we're like, what if we just ping 5 people every week? Doesn't matter who, like, they could be a friend, they could be a colleague, they could be a client, they could be a prospect. Just ping them, say what's up.
Yeah,
see if they
don't
want to get a
overthink the
coffee.
message.
Just go from
like
there.
Sometimes my text message is just like, hey, long time. How you been?
Yeah.
Do you have anything, Allie?
No, I was going to say, I don't even know if I would say SEO is easy, like David said, but I think it's really straightforward. I think people just make it really complex. Like, I wouldn't say that everything's easy. It does take a lot of work, and it takes a bit of integrity if you prioritize
simple,
quality.
not easy.
Yes. Yeah. But I agree with both of you guys. I remember I was doing an analysis last week or the week before of like a lot of our client data. And I sat on this spreadsheet for probably 20 minutes and I was like, what formula should I be using? And then I was like, fuck it. I'm just going to manually type in all this data. It took me a while, but I was like, I need to get to like from 0 to 1 and then I can figure the rest out. So the automation trap, I don't think I fall into it as deep as David has, but I definitely try to like zhuzh up what I'm doing. And I'm like, nah, I just need to like, just type it and I'll figure it out.
Also, ChatGPT is great for Google Sheets formulas. I don't write formulas from scratch anymore, really.
Well, I was talking about trying to like export HubSpot and like VLOOKUP this shit. And I was like, no, I just need to get it all out there and then I'll figure out the rest. So
Finn had a really good story when we were talking to him for the LinkedIn Accelerator program about a guitarist. He's in Chelsea Grin and a couple other bands who's like, he said he's like the best in metal right now and just an absolutely stunning, amazing guitarist. And people would ask like, oh, how do you get this good or whatever? And he's like, you practice this thing, like the scale or whatever for 4 hours a day, every day.
One scale?
Certainly it's simple. Whatever the technique was. He didn't go into specifics there. But yeah, no, I mean, the foundations are basically that, though. You practice scales, right? It's like over and over. In jiu-jitsu, you're just going to practice arm bars and triangle chokes like day in, day out. It's pretty simple foundational stuff.
Yeah.
Muay Thai, I'm guessing, is the same. Like you're going to practice your roundhouse kick.
Kick a bag 100 times.
Left hook, right hook, whatever. Like it's there's only a finite amount of moves. There's only a finite amount of ingredients. And you just do it day in and day out. And it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to be consistent with that.
Yeah.
But that's where it comes from. That's where like the sustainable results come from. Ooh. How do you approach SEO in a world where search is increasingly influenced and driven by AI and machine learning?
It's a great question from AI. Sounds like a threat.
I'm coming for you. We've talked about this so much.
We've talked about it a lot, yeah. Well, I'm starting to monitor in my, I guess, rank tracking and SEO monitoring when AI summaries are present in Google results. We've already talked a lot about the surround sound SEO strategy and how that effectively parlays into AI summaries on Google, but also in ChatGPT and Perplexity, and how it's essentially using the ubiquity of citations and mentions in relation to categorical keywords to basically position you in a category. What?
There's a lot of big words, Alex.
It's a very dense sentence. I got it, though. I got it. Wait, how are you monitoring those things?
There's a tool. Oh, man, I can't remember what it's called now.
Don't you get notifications from it?
I'm so sorry to this tool. No, there's a specific tool. Sorry, I can't remember it. I just started a trial. I can send it to you guys, and maybe I can put it in the show notes if I find it.
Okay.
It's marginally useful at this point. It's kind of like, oh, what do you do with that information? Like, do you change your strategy? And it's like, maybe not, right? Like the foundations are kind of still the same. It's just, I'm starting to think about like, this is probably going to be more important. So I'm like, all right, how do I start building or like learning tools that are kind of like, it has this at the centerpiece instead of just like a novelty.
Yeah. The strategy team and I have been talking about how to run some experiments with those summaries and some other tools, but the step one is data collection. And I feel like as long as AIO, are you talking about AIO, like those overview summaries that you're tracking?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. You're looking at it almost like a feature snippet, right? You're like, oh, this one has a definition snippet or
that
whatever.
Is my personal hypothesis is if you're thinking about what to change or how to optimize for that, which I don't think we'll know as long as it's in beta. Because I actually started tracking that too for one of our clients, but then the next day I'd go back and the overview would be different or be gone. So I think it's hard to really like capture any consistency there. But the team and I have been talking about like how we should compensate for that in our strategies, or at least be able to speak about it confidently with clients. And right now, I don't think we can with it being in beta, but the data collection element is interesting, noticing patterns. And are you keeping track of what sources are being cited in AIO as well, or just what queries show.
Not to that depth.
Okay.
Yeah, no. But I do think that's the next step in figuring out potentially ways that you can become the citation, or like in the case of surround sound and Bofu keywords, like how you can get mentioned, which would basically be the surround sound SEO strategy. Yeah. But no, I haven't gone that granular yet.
I've also noticed that there's inconsistencies when, let's say, like I've seen our clients who are ranking like 1, 2, or 3 for really high volume queries that have an AIO result, but despite ranking at the top of the organic results, they're not mentioned in the like sources in the AIO. So I would love to know if there's any rhyme or reason to which ones are cited, but I have read some data that those get really poor click through. The sources that are cited.
Oh, I've read data that they get great click through. Actually,
I've seen differently. I'll have to find it. I think that's the point, though, is there's so many inconsistencies right now that it's hard to really track patterns like you could with featured snippets and all that stuff.
Which to me is very exciting. It's a little bit of Wild West and like a shakeup that I think we needed in the space.
I was going to ask if you guys had seen any of the chatter about AIO from like the consumer perspective. I mean, it started with memes on Instagram. You guys saw some of those like really, really bad. You didn't?
Nope.
No, I haven't seen any of this.
This is from like non-technical folks, like a lot of folks on Instagram that are like, this is stupid, Google sucks, like a lot of that chatter. But there was some pretty bad AIO results. I think it's because they over-indexed on Reddit.
Oh, like the glue on pizza thing?
The jumping off the bridge one. Like I think
I've seen some of those.
It pulled from Reddit because Google and Reddit have a partnership, and that was like trying to fix a lot of like the over-engineered content on Google, but it just surfaced the stupidest overview results. And as a result of that, people were like, Google sucks, like AI sucks.
Yeah.
Which I think they've since fixed it.
I think those are...
But that was pretty funny.
It's funny, those people... I get where they're coming from, but like they're kind of looking for any excuse to shit on Google, where it's like it's such a hard moderation problem. Like I'm sure you could find search results without an AI snippet as well. That it's like a poor, like a crazy result. It's the same thing as like social media content management, content moderation. It's like the scale with which you have to manage is like absolutely insane. So like law of large numbers, there's just going to be like 1 or 2 crazy examples, but like. From my perspective, like consumer perspective, it's pretty solid stuff. Like I usually start there and it gives me some cursory level understanding. And then if it's like a complex search or a topic, like I'll go in and read more details and click into some search results.
Yeah. I think this whole conversation, it kind of makes me feel more grounded in what I've been telling clients who ask this question is pay attention to it. Like don't make drastic actions, like trying to optimize for it or like getting ahead of it. Because the way I kind of see it right now is Google's they fumbled quite a bit. And I mean, they're the ones in the arena, so I'm not like shitting on them, but some of the stuff has like been rolled out and like they've had to make a lot of changes. And I kind of view them as like a startup again. They're figuring it out as they go. They're making a lot of mistakes in public and people are shitting on them. But it's like you wouldn't base your entire strategy on what a startup is doing. That they do have like their core business, so maybe that's a lot more stable, but these things that they're trying to figure out in real time are probably not things to base your entire strategy on. It's going to be a very feeble strategy if that's the case. But I mean, as a consumer, I'm also using it. I love those summaries. I always triple check if what it's saying is correct, especially if I'm looking up like stuff about medication, which I recently did. But yeah, I actually think they're great for the user experience once they get better.
Here's a couple more interesting questions, and we're close on time, but there's 2 on like leadership and team dynamics and the personal journeys. So this one I really like. How do you ensure that your team remains innovative and creative, especially when working with clients who have more traditional expectations?
That's interesting. I think what sticks out to me is space. So capacity at 80 to 90%, I'd say 90 is pushing it. But if we don't leave space for our team to, be able to discuss and kind of reflect on what's worked, what's not worked, probe into changes in the industry. So conversations around experimentation, even with things that, aren't quite settled yet, like the AIO stuff. I think we challenge our team really well to think bigger than what they're doing. So even though we might sell into a certain type of project or a certain scope, not only are we always asking what's next for renewal and retention purposes, but how can we go bigger? What other opportunities are we identifying? But I think space is the key and something that we've continued to get better at, because I think it gives our team time to reflect and think on what else there is to do.
Space and a more murky concept of a growth mindset, which is like when approached with something new that we haven't done before, the attitude we want to support and evangelize is basically, oh, interesting, we could probably figure this out, versus like, we don't do things that way. Like, let's not do this, right? Just like an openness towards new problems and new skills. I personally, I keep like a monthly call, especially with our strategists, where it's specifically designed to take those 20% time projects and say like, hey, outside of your, day-to-day client work, it could relate to client work, or it could be something that you're interested in building, whether it's like your own LinkedIn personal brand work, or whether you want to learn more about analytics, or whether you want to like do something just interesting and creative. I try to help support on those projects. So that's one thing that I've done there. And then I would say like the internal projects and sandboxes that we give too, where the editorial team is working on the podcast magazine. So I think that's a pretty creative and innovative thing that could even be a service that we offer. Like that's an interesting way that we use our own, eat our own dog food, right?
Well, that also follows our principle of this should be fun. I think a lot of what you're saying too about like the growth mindset, we model that in how we respond to like business challenges as well. So like we've had some periods of time in the last couple of years where things have gotten murky, a little bit scary, a little bit uncertain, but I don't think the three of us naturally respond strongly to that stuff. I think we're pretty level-headed, but even with our team, we're like, we'll figure this out. Like I think doing that with the big picture challenges helps them do that with some of the, I wouldn't call them smaller challenges, but more like the focus challenges that they might have with client accounts.
Last question. What's a surprising way in which your leadership style has evolved since starting Omniscient Digital? Allie, you're smiling.
I feel like we should answer that for each other.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
David's gotten softer and Allie's gotten harder.
Accurate.
Yeah, you always said I should be a little bit more of a, sociopath? Or narcissist? Which one?
Definitely not a narcissist. No.
One of those two.
I said you should maybe read Machiavelli's The Prince.
All right.
I think you've gotten softer too, Alex. Maybe like at least outwardly. At least I think I've outwardly had to. I know I naturally have instinct to impose sometimes, and I've had to dial back on that and also be aware of what impact my words have. And so I lead with a lot more questions. I don't start with an answer because I know we have a really intelligent, hardworking team. I'm like, I just trust them a lot more. Whereas, I mean, I'm willing to say like I even had trust issues like for a lot of my life. And now I'm just like, oh, I just trust the team. I trust you both. And I don't need to be the one giving out all the answers or giving my 2 cents all the time. My 2 cents are just 2 cents. Someone else has their 2 cents that might be better. And I'm totally open to just being wrong. But yeah, I've definitely I'm softer.
It's hard to say like objectively and externally, which is why, Allie, your framing was very good on that. I explicitly have tried to do two things, which one is basically being more organized, a little more buttoned up, because in the past I had just been a little bit more flowy and creative, and I would throw ideas out that I was like half serious about, and it was a little bit all over the place. And now I try to, especially with like, sales to strategy handoff, really designing one pagers and communicating things very clearly and directly and having my shit together. So just generally being more organized is something that I've explicitly been working on, and then trusting people more. So the first inclination I have in many cases is like, oh, I'll just do this. Like, I'll just roll up my sleeves and do this. And I'm like, I don't have to do everything. This is insane. We have a whole team filled with people who are better than me at many things that I am piling on my own plate, which is eliminating the opportunity for them to learn and do interesting stuff and also stressing me out. So those are two explicit things I've worked on.
If I had to give a read to how maybe all three of us used to be, is at least maybe just for me, but I'm curious if it resonates for you both, is like there's definitely some lone wolf energy.
Oh yeah.
Like, I don't know. I think for me, I've always felt like I've had to take on the pressure and do all the work myself and like carry the team. And whether or not it was actually accurate is not the discussion point, but I would put that pressure on myself, which is, I guess, the fact that now I've been saying this phrase to the team of like, the strength of the team is in an individual, the strength of the individual is in a team, which is a lot more, it's like the opposite of the lone wolf mentality that I think it's my impression is the three of us have gotten better at not putting that sort of pressure on ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that empowers the team as well. Like they're like, oh, wait, David, Ali, and Alex don't have all the answers. Like I'm supposed to find the answer. They trust me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
On what you said, Alex, I think I had the opposite move on that spectrum. I was wanted structure on everything, kind of wanted to like be super certain and be a bit more controlled in processes and all that. And I've definitely loosened up a lot more. I think I'm just randomly sharing ideas with you both and just be like, hey, might be a stupid idea, but what do you think of this? And
yeah,
it is kind of uncomfortable sometimes, but I find that fluidity allows for a lot more productive conversations.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's this point that like growth looks different for different people.
Yeah.
And I wrote about this on my personal newsletter. It's like this idea that like if you're really dialed in, type A, optimization focused, like Peter Attia, early Tim Ferriss, whatever, then your growth might actually come from allowing yourself to take a nap or watch a movie or have a slice of cake. And then on the other side, if you're very undisciplined and unorganized and lack motivation, maybe you should be looking more towards listening to David Goggins' audiobook. And like maybe, you should abstain from that second glass of wine, or, like growth could be the exact opposite depending on what side of the spectrum you kind of fall on naturally.
Yeah. I think I was definitely more like David, like type A, but I think specifically for me, I've continued to replace myself since you all brought me on. So I was the first writer, and then I hired a writer, and then I was first editor, hired an editor, head of content, hired Sam, led the strategy team, just replaced myself as of this week. Now I don't know what to do. I'm just kidding. Plenty to do. Very not good at not having all the answers. So I think that's something I've improved at, is not having, like, that's not necessarily what leadership means. Like, that's not what even management means. I've learned a lot from Andrea, my time with you guys, some reading I've done. But I think letting go of the perfectionism and having to know everything to feel worthy is something I have changed a lot. I'm just getting harder and meaner. I'm just kidding.
Stay hard.
Being more blunt and knowing that honesty is kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good. Nice. Well, AI was actually a pretty good interviewer.
That's great.
In my opinion.
That's great. Thanks, AI.